She holds a dual degree, postgraduate degree, MA in English and MA in Mass Communication and Journalism from St. Xavier's College. She has completed her B.Ed and MPhil too. She has been working as a language teacher and the head of English department at Mitibai Junior College, Vilepale West, Mumbai since 28 years. She has also worked as assistant professor in degree college too. She's having total 35 years of experience. She is an allied member of the Board of Studies at Balbharti and Textbook Committee, HEC Board, Pune. She has been conducting spoken English and personality development classes for more than 10 years. She has presented papers on various topics like Vita Humanity and the denigration of language in India and storytelling as a teaching technique. One of her deepest concern is the development and the way of English language in India today. We are at the crossroads. We, as teachers of English, need to think deeply about English as a language and how we need to approach it. She is passionate about language and literature, loves to read, currently reading a lot of non-fiction literature related to politics, economics, spirituality, keen interested in Indian culture and its growth. To sum up, I would like to say that she is one of the dignitary personality in the field of education and down to earth. She is here today to teach us the prose, the cope, and the anthem. Without wasting much of her time, Ellie's platform is all yours. Over to you, Raseshri, ma'am.
Thank you, Premjit ma'am, for your very kind words. Thank you,
Thank
Elle,
you,
for
ma'am.
inviting. Thank you, Elle, for inviting me today. It's indeed an honor. I would like to acknowledge uh, Bagde sir, Rade sir, Sachin Jadhav sir, Sunil Patil sir. I saw many textbook committee members, and whoever I saw, I shall name the others too. Thank you for being here and encouraging me. I saw Jayashri ma'am, uh, Sangeeta ma'am, Suhasini ma'am, and Praveen sir. Thank you for being here.
Shubhra is also
It's
there, ma'am.
one thing
Shubhra,
to,
ma'am.
okay, Shubhra, yes, I didn't see her. Shubhra too. Thank you, and it's nice to have all of you here. I hope I do justice to my being here today. It's different to talking to a class of students, whether they are 100 or 200, but when you're talking to your peers and your equals, it's a different thing. Please excuse me for any gaffes, they are all mine. uh, Without wasting too much time, let's please begin. Can I have the first slide? Yes. I am going to deal with a very favorite broad topic of mine, which is the story. Second slide, please. Today we are dealing with Cop and the Anthem, and I'm going to begin with the story of the story. Now, what I mean by this is, as we are dealing with a short story, let me begin with the story. Let me begin with the story. A story in human history is as old as human civilization. Stories happened in different forms, in terms of imitation, in terms of gestures, then through folk literature, folk storytelling when language appeared. And then, of course, when the written form came, in India, we have a very ancient tradition of storytelling, perhaps the oldest in the world. And uh, I will begin with one of the oldest stories, or rather, the story of the story. A long, long time ago, there was a king, King Amar Shakti. He ruled the kingdom of Mahilaropia. He was a very good king. As these are the kind of stories all of us like. long, long ago, there lived a king. He was a good king. He had 3 sons. And so involved was he in statecraft that he did not realize when his children grew up. And suddenly one day, when he thought that he's getting a little older, he's losing his energy, he thought, I should anoint one of my sons as the king. And he called them to him. It was like he was seeing them for the first time. They had grown up and he had missed out on their growing up. And he saw that they were rather lazy, indifferent, and he had completely neglected their education. And he was appalled. How did I do such a thing? So he immediately summoned his courtiers, all the pundits and all the sages in his court. When he shared his agony with them, they were very condescending. Some of them said, oh God, Sanskrit grammar will take 12 years. Administration will take another 5 years. Then politics, diplomacy. When are your children going to learn? They are already about 20. So he was even more worried. Then somebody suggested the name of Vishnu Sharma. He was a teacher. He had a Gurukul. And the king thought, okay, let me summon him and see what he says. So he summons Pandit Vishnu Sharma to his court. Vishnu Sharma takes one look at the 3 sons and he realizes that they are not unintelligent, but they are lazy and they are bored because they have nothing to do. So he told the king, I take this up as a challenge. I will see that your sons learn something, but you will have to send them to my Gurukul for 6 months. The king is overjoyed that some solution is in sight. And he said, of course, I'm ready to send them. Vishnu Sharma took them with him. And what he did was, he sat down and he wrote down a few stories. He realized that if they have to learn and they are bored, they will have to be entertained along with the learning that should happen. So he took some of the age-old stories and wrote them down, and then he made up some stories for them. He had a total of 25 stories ready, and through them, the characters in the story were animals, humans, and through them, he started teaching them the various things that they needed to know in order to rule. What were those stories? Those stories were the stories of the Panchatantra. Okay? The Panchatantra, which we all studied as children. And today we are rediscovering our past. And the Panchatantra stories are taught even in great institutions like the IIMs, where they are teaching they are teaching management principles through the Panchatantra. So I began with the story of the story. Let's move into the world of the modern short stories. Next slide, please. Yes, into the world of the short story. Now, earlier, the short story was part of the rapid reading syllabus. I thought, we need to lay a lot of stress on the short story today because it is the most suitable form for an impatient generation. You know how short the attention span of today's generation is. Even our attention span seems to have reduced. It's very fleeting. In fact, now we have something called tiny tales, which are stories of only 2 and 3 lines. So we are moving towards that, just as we moved from the test match to 1 days. I think we are moving from short stories of 10 pages, 5 pages to maybe 1 page, maybe just a few lines. So I think we should lay more stress on the short story as a form. I'm going to share with you all what I did when I used to introduce this section to my students. I thought that if they know why they are studying this, because see, at the junior college level, we have students who have already chosen their streams. They are either arts, science, or commerce students. They are always wondering, especially the commerce and the science students, why are they studying literature? Why are they studying the short story? So I thought it's good to introduce that. And I also feel that even if we, at the 11th and 12th standard level, we call ourselves language teachers rather than literature teachers, I don't think there is a wall between the two, and we shouldn't even put up a wall. I think literature is also language, and language obviously has literature in it. So let's not separate the two. So when I tried to introduce it, I first asked them to do a silent reading of the story. Now, what I did was, I also wanted them to understand, first of all, what is silent reading? Silent reading is the adult way of reading, which many of our students, even at the age of 14 and 15, don't. Many of them are moving their lips, which is a very wrong way of reading, because that inhibits your speed. Some of them, even if they move their fingers over the book. Some of them mouth the words. You can even hear them reading. Now, all these are very bad habits because they inhibit and if we want to go ahead in life, whichever field we are in, we should have a certain minimum speed. So I introduced this concept of speed reading or rapid reading or smart reading. And if they understand what their speed should be, I think I kind of try to awaken them to the fact that they should read a little more, which will improve their speed. So if your speed is around 350 to 400 words per minute, that is just the average of 18. If it is less than that, then we have to really work very hard. And if it is more than that, you can keep increasing. People read one book, a book of 300-400 pages in 1 hour, and it's possible. Okay, so that's what I tell them. I also tell them what is a story, but I'm not going to talk about it here because I'm going to refer to it in the following slides. Okay, and I also, obviously, when you teach them the short story as a form, we are teaching them poetry, we are teaching them short stories, we are teaching them prose. We have also introduced the novel this year, or an extract from the novel. So obviously they should know what's the difference. So how to appreciate a short story? What's the difference between prose, a short story, and a long short story and a novel? So I do all that, and I'm going to do it as we progress. So I shall not dwell on this too much here. So we'll go to the next slide. As we are talking of O. Henry, and all of us love O. Henry, I know. All his famous stories, Last Leaf, okay, obviously Cop and the Anthem, The Gift of the Magi. I happened to read The Green Door recently. All wonderful stories. Now, if we have to appreciate his stories, we need to know just a little bit about O. Henry. Now, O. Henry was an American writer, lived around more than 100 years back, the turn of the 19th century. He came from a solid middle-class background. His father was a doctor, and but he didn't have, his mother passed away very early, but he had an aunt and a sister who brought him up. Now, he had to work very early. He used to work in a bank. He was also working he did lots of odd jobs. So remember, this is not the America of today. This was the America which was still growing. If we have to look at the milieu in which William Sidney Potter or O. Henry grew up, it was an America which showed a lot of promise, but it was still growing. It was always a land of migrants. And Potter was growing up in this, or rather, O. Henry was growing up in this milieu. There is, the incident in his life which relates to this story, I must recall. He was working in a bank, and he was accused of embezzlement of funds. Now, whether he did it actually or not, we don't know, but he ran away. The minute he was accused of embezzlement, he ran away. And then God knows what made him come back and surrender to the police. So he was caught more because he ran away than because he was embezzling funds. And obviously, he was jailed. He was jailed for 5 years. Now, in jail, he started writing stories. Now, obviously, if you see his stories and if you see his life later on, you realize that he was a very good human being. He had a very good core. So in spite of being in jail, he tried to do something worthwhile. And that is where he started his career. But because he knew that perhaps he will not be accepted as a writer because he was in jail, he took the pseudonym O. Henry. And almost till the end of his life, which was a very short life of just 48 years, people did not know that O. Henry was Sidney Potter. He preferred to remain anonymous because perhaps it was a punishment he was giving himself because he was caught for something which was unlawful, if not criminal. And that really affected his life entirely because this happened sometime in 1997. He was about 30, 35 years old then. And he was writing. O. Henry had become a name, but nobody knew that William Sidney Potter was O. Henry. Um, he was writing during the time when Louisa May Alcott was writing, Walt Whitman was writing. Scott Fitzgerald, though young, is also a contemporary of O. Henry. And of course, the later writers were very, very great. Tennessee Williams, Hemingway, one of the greatest. God knows why creative people, great writers, painters, as we can see, even artists have that sad core inside them. O. Henry also had core. He even turned to alcohol, and that is how he actually passed away. Now, if we have to look at his style, if we look at the very popular stories which all of us have taught, his style is very humane. He is writing about real people. He is writing about struggling people. I think that is why he connected with the audience so well. He's writing about ordinary middle class or lower middle class people. It was the America he became familiar with. So in The Last Leaf, we see struggling artists. And if you see, even Louisa May Alcott has a similar milieu, especially if she's writing about the city, then we are introduced to artists who are struggling. And he writes about them with deep empathy. He also writes about them with deep understanding. He knows what they have gone through because he himself went through it. And he also writes about the suburbs of New York. In fact, the suburbs of New York are like a character in his stories. They are, New York is like a character in his stories because he writes about the dark side of New York. Plus, in Cop and the Anthem, we are also introduced to the affluent side of New York. We meet affluent people in the restaurants which Soapy visits. So his stories are laced with poverty and pathos. And the characters are all grey. You won't meet extreme characters in O. Henry's stories. Even if they are black or white, he writes it with a very empathetic, compassionate pen. He will not write about them as, he will not be condescending to them. His empathy shines through. Now, Cop and the Anthem is perhaps his most beautifully written and most popular story. It was published in 1906 in his story collection, The 4 Million. Can we have the next slide, please? The next slide, please. Yeah. Now, I will briefly introduce plot and character, and then we will go into the main story. Now, what is plot? Okay. Now, if we look at the normal plot, which we all are very familiar with, it is the resolution or the beginning, the establishing of the setting. Then it is the rising theme, then the climax, then the falling plot of falling action, and then the resolution. There are two types of plots according to me. I'm not going to go by the book. I'm just referring to plot in terms of what we need to know in order to connect with junior college students. Now there are plots which are character driven, and there are plots which are theme driven. Okay, now if we have to look at a character driven plot, Cop in the Anthem itself is a character driven plot. One of the most wonderful stories which we are dealing with in the 11th standard is Mrs. Adis. Now, Mrs. Adis is a character driven plot. The plot is secondary. It is Mrs. Adis, her dilemmas, her choices which push the plot forward. So it's a character driven plot. Now, sometimes it can be a theme driven plot, like most of Tagore's, R.K. Narayan's, Ruskin Bonds, today Sudha Murthy's plots have, the plot which is the main, and the characters are secondary. Perhaps we have a combination which makes up our character, like primary colors. We are all made of certain aspects. Okay, that is why we are human. But that's why, in a plot driven theme, the characters are secondary. They are universal characters. They are anybody. They can be anyone. Okay, now those same primary colors, when they are used in different proportions, you can come up with different shades of character, different shades of color, different shades of character. I'm just using the analogy of paint to illustrate what I'm saying. So when a character is unique, like Soapy is, or Mrs. Adis is, the author is using the same ingredients of emotion, thoughts, life, background, what kind of life the character has led. And all that comes to what the character has become. I'm going to use certain analogies from films, because sometimes you can connect with children very well if you use the analogy of a film. Now if you take the plot of, say, Dil Chahta Hai, okay, it's a very popular film. It's an iconic film. It's a very classy film, and everybody has most probably seen it. So if you take it as an example, you see that there is a unity of plot. Now what do I mean by unity? Unity means, now this is obviously what Aristotle said. It should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, what did Aristotle mean by that? Is it as easy as it sounds? Well, if we actually start writing a story, we realize how difficult that is, because it means one incident follows from what happened before. There has to be a logical connection, and then the end is tied up in the end. So what I said, resolution, rising action, climax, falling action, and again resolution, which is the end. Now, this is of course the broad idea of plot. Artists obviously are very talented. They know their craft. They know how to make a plot most effective. So they decide where they are going to begin to tell the story. Now, if we take the illustration of the plot or the theme of Dil Chahta Hai, it begins before the end. Then it keeps going to the past. Then there is a somewhat linear action happening, which is chronological. At the same time, they keep going to that place just before the end. And then when the story reaches that place, which is perhaps the climax, it goes ahead and the story ends on a happy note. Now, why did the script writer, the story writer, decide to tell the story like that? Because that is the way she or he thought the plot would be most impactful. Now, that is a choice which the writer makes. Now, see, if we take these 5 fingers of mine as a story, what is a good plot? You know what a good plot is? If you remove anything, everything should fall apart. At the same time, if we add anything, it should perhaps be unnecessary. Now, if we compare today's serials, you know, the soap operas which go on for years and years, they are playing on the human mind, which likes to know what next, what next, what next. And they use that to make people glued to the screen. Actually, they're just making money at our expense, unfortunately. Because if the plot were unified, it should end somewhere. Only then will it have a unity. Only then will it satisfy our mind, our heart. It will make us feel fulfilled. We keep watching, though we are disgusted with the way the story is meandering illogically, because somehow we want to know what next. Okay, so that is what unity of plot is. Okay, let's go to the next. The characters in Cop and the Anthem. Now, there is only one central character. It's not as though other characters don't exist. It's perhaps in the form of society. But those which do exist are perhaps policemen, waiters, clients in a hotel. They are the ones who exist. Okay, now what is the dilemma that Soapy faces? Before that, we look at the name. Why the name Soapy? Can anybody answer in the chat box, please? Why is the name Soapy given to this character? He doesn't have a surname, and the name Soapy is also not perhaps the name that he has been given in his cradle. Can somebody please type in the chat box? Can you all type in the chat box, and can I know? Can I know?
Ma'am is still joining. Sachin sir, could you please read out the responses till she rejoins?
Yes, sure.
Okay. So she asked about the significance of the name Soapy. So will you please read it aloud? What are the suggestions by the teachers?
Nobody can understand. It's moving very fast. Wait a minute. Slippery characters can sleep anywhere, anytime. Intelligent. Slippery character like soap. Soapy name indicates irony of fate. Can't listen voice is not clear. Okay, that is clear. And who is trying to escape? He was smooth and slippery, cleaning thoughts like a soap. He's just like a soap, inconsistent, slippery, littered, and bubbly because he is urging to get arrested. Cannot get caught. Slippery character. Again, Deepak Valvi says he has all the ingredients of soap, perhaps. So there are no, they are flushing with their responses. Dr. Shrikant Gangdhar Patil says it's round character. Oh, we have Dr. Suhasini Jadhav. Welcome, madam. She is saying nomadic, simple. Thank you, madam. Abhijit Deshpande says wants to please everyone. Then Sandeep Chaudhary says he roams everywhere. Has madam joined? Okay. There are some more. Gauri says homeless and middle class man.
Welcome back, ma'am.
Yes, madam is there.
Sorry. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Sorry. I've joined with my cell phone now because I think I'm getting pop-ups, please. Yeah. Yeah. I was talking about Soapy, and I said that his name is not like Ram Madhav, Saurav, or John, Bill, Stephen. It is Soapy. I think it reminds us of maybe Munna Bhai, Chotu, Barkya, names which perhaps are given to young men in jails. I'm getting these pop-ups from the waiting room. Yeah. Okay. So where do you think he has acquired the name? Most probably in a jail. The story opens with Soapy roaming the streets of New York. Why do we empathize with Soapy so much? Am I seen? Because I cannot see myself at all. Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
yes, madam.
Yeah.
You are very much audible and we can see you.
Okay, thank you so much because I cannot see myself. I'm not able to make out. Sorry. Okay.
Okay.
Why do we empathize with Soapy so much? Why do we feel so much pity for him? See, it is natural to feel sad for him at the end of the story. But why do we feel sad for him right from the beginning? Is Soapy really a villain? Is he a villain? No. I'm asking the question. Do you all think that Soapy is a villain? Is there anyone who thinks Soapy is a villain?
No, madam.
The answer is no. I think yes. Why is it that we empathize with Soapy? Because let's not forget, the writer is always like God. And the writer intends that we should see Soapy in an empathetic manner. He wants us to empathize with him. He wants us to feel for him. He has, if you see, he has not told us the backstory of Soapy anywhere. But somewhere we know that Soapy has a good core. We know that Soapy is a good human being. We know that, and why do we know it? How do we know it? That is the craft of the writer. Everywhere we see, the writer has taken us into the stream of consciousness of the character. We all the time know what Soapy is feeling. We know what Soapy is thinking. Every time he is depressed or dejected, when he is roaming the streets, every time his attempt to get arrested fails, if I can read out some of the sentences after every time he fails, Soapy, disgust in his heart, loafed along. The next time he fails, the island seemed far away. He seemed doomed to liberty. Now, this is a very interesting sentence. Doomed to liberty. It's almost like an oxymoron. How can you be doomed to liberty? Liberty is freedom. Is he really free? Is he making a free choice? And if he is making a free choice, it's a very strange choice because he is choosing to go to prison, which is the opposite of freedom. There is this irony running through the entire story. The prison offers him security. Somebody just wrote that the prison offers him shelter. And that is why also we empathize with him. Then the next time he fails, the author says, disconsolate, Soapy seized his unavailing racket. The thought brought a little panic. Now, this is the last time he fails when he throws the umbrella into a hole where some road work is going on. That is the point when he has almost hit rock bottom. See, Soapy is a very determined character. All through the day, though we know very well that inside him, he is dejected, he is lonely, he is obviously sad, but yet, as he is still determined. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he tries to get himself arrested. He's still determined. But when he fails in the evening, and it's almost twilight time, it has started getting cold, and he remembers, oh my God, I have to go now to the cold park bench. Is he really free when he made the choice, or is he bound by his past? He is definitely bound by his past. His past has trapped him. We don't know what that past is. The author doesn't want us to know, but we can definitely speculate. And we are going to go to that later. We can definitely speculate. Can any of you, perhaps instead of writing it later, can any of you just quickly write in the chat box what kind of past he has? Or maybe we should do it when we discuss the end later. We'll leave it for later. Okay, now the author wants us to like him. Why? In the beginning of the story itself, he enters a restaurant and he snaps his fingers at the waiter, and he tells the waiter that why are you keeping a gentleman waiting? Now he very well knows he is not a gentleman. There is sarcasm in his tone. He is obviously extremely he's full of self-loathing. He knows he has fallen very low, but he is not allowing himself to think too deeply, because if he thinks too deeply, he will feel too deeply, and he cannot allow himself to do that. He wants to be sent to the island to escape the harsh winter, and perhaps he has done that before. He arouses our pity, our empathy. In fact, we empathize with him so much that we almost wish he gets arrested. We feel worried for him. We look upon him with an indulgent eye, like we would look upon maybe a younger brother or a young son, and we want to perhaps shake him. We want to teach him. We want to make him understand that don't do this with your life. Now, there is also the class element in this part. It is just touched upon. Soapy has obviously now fallen to the lower class, but later on in the story, we realize that perhaps he comes from the middle class, where he has some solid values. And because he has solid values, he has a conscience. And because he has a conscience, it does get aroused by the end of the story. Let's go to the next slide. I think you have already gone to the next slide. Please don't move. The title and the plot of The Cop and the Anthem. Now, the title of the story, Cop and the Anthem, actually show the two sides of the plot. The cop represents jail, the cop represents the law, and that is the choice that Soapy is making. Whereas the anthem stands for, obviously, religion and spirituality. It also stands for your conscience. It stands for good people. It stands for hardworking, decent life, where there is place for religion. The plot of Cop and the Anthem is linear, but passes the test of resolution, rising action, climax, which we are going to discuss, anticlimax, which also comes at the end. Now, the plot in the short story has to quickly establish character as well as plot. So they have to be very brief. That is why a good storyteller will always tell you why he or she used a particular word. Even one word or phrase in the story has relation to the entire plot. You remove one word and the story falls apart. That is the beauty of these stories. And that is why they leave such a strong impact on us readers. It applies to character as well as plot. And this, perhaps, if I have to take an example of a film, perhaps we can take the example of Satyajit Ray's stories. And if you look at his Pather Panchali, which got such acclaim world over, the plot was so simple, and yet every shot told us something about the family. Every plot, every shot told us what the author wanted to, the director and the writer wanted us to know. Let's go to the next slide, please. The next slide, yeah. Now, this is the most important and the most beautiful part of the story. Perhaps this is the part which makes us love the story so much. The tragic irony or the twist in the tale. Now, all good short stories have a twist in the tale. That suddenness when, the end is completely different from what you expect it to be, that makes it so charming. That makes us readers love it so much. Now, this part is also extremely sad and poignant. This is also the most moving part of the story. It is a classic twist in the tale. Just give me a second. Oh, 1 minute. 1 minute. I will just read it. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
You can hear me, no? Okay,
Yes,
because
ma'am.
I'm just shutting the video for a minute. I'm going to read something. Okay?
Please.
It's okay, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. 1 second. Just give me a second. Yeah, just give me a second. Okay, now he reaches that place. And I'm just reading that part because I feel unless I read it, I'm not going to be able to tell it, discuss it better. But on an unusually quiet corner, Soapy came to a standstill. Here was an old church, quaint and rambling and gabled. Through one violet-stained window, a soft light glowed, where, no doubt, the organist loitered over the keys, making sure of his mastery of the coming Sabbath anthem. For there drifted out to Soapy's ears sweet music that caught and held him transfixed against the convolutions of the iron fence. The moon was above, lustrous and serene. Vehicles and pedestrians were few. Sparrows twittered sleepily in the eaves. For a little while, the scene might have been a country churchyard, and the anthem that the organist played cemented Soapy to the iron fence, for he had known it well in the days when his life contained such things as mothers and roses and ambitions and friends and immaculate thoughts and colors. The conjunction of Soapy's receptive state of mind and the influences about the old church wrought a sudden, wonderful change in his soul. He viewed with swift horror the pit into which he had tumbled, the degraded days, unworthy desires, dead hopes, wretched faculties, and base motives that made up his existence. Now, this is the most moving part. If we have to name it, we should call it an epiphanic moment. This is an epiphanic moment. What is epiphany? That sudden flash of lightning, that sudden light in the heart or the brain when there is a complete transformation in the character. And the writing is what we call epigrammatic writing. Very, very short, cryptic, to the point. See how he describes his past: mother, roses, church, Sunday best, immaculate thoughts. Just that much. He could have gone on. We can write an entire novel about Sophie's childhood. But he remains very short, very pithy, very to the point. And we get a glimpse into Sophie's past. And we want to know more. Now, that is the skill of the writer. He is not going to tell you more. He lets your imagination loose. Can maybe some of you can even unmute yourselves, and can you please, in very short, describe what you think was Sophie's childhood like? Please, can someone would someone like to answer? What do you think is Sophie's childhood like? Anybody would like to answer? Or are you answering in the chat box? Are you answering in the chat box, or does anybody would anybody like to answer?
I think, madam, he must be an orphan. And
Orphan, but he talks of mother.
okay, actually, haven't gone through it.
It could be that his mother has passed away, so you're not wrong.
Right.
Yeah, it could be that he had a lovely mother who passed away.
Yeah, in that way.
Yes, yes, yes. So, yeah.
And he must have fought with all the ill things in the society.
Yes, 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 yes.
That course, he must have developed some things which are not socially acceptable, and because that he must have been punished.
Yes, but see, we have to keep in mind that he has a very good core. Somewhere he has got a very good upbringing. That is why he is ready to pull himself back. Though he knows he's only going to become a chauffeur or a driver. But he knows that it's better to be a driver or a chauffeur rather than be a dishonest human being. He has not gone so far into the world of lawlessness or crime that, he doesn't understand right from wrong. He definitely knows what is right and wrong. This is a cathartic moment. And the beauty of O. Henry's writing is he makes him realize, see, that is also so convincing. How does he realize? It's music which makes him realize. Music has that ability to make us feel very deeply. And just one or two chords, opening chords of any music can set the mood. A ghazal can immediately make us all very somber. If some party music it comes on, we all will start feeling like grooving or tapping to the music. Some of us may even dance. Music really creates the mood. Music touches the core. There is something about music that connects deeply with a human being, and that is what moves him and makes him realize how low he has sunk and how wrong it is. So he wants to come out. Now, how many Sophies do you and I meet in our lives? Do we meet somebody like a Sophie? Is there a Sophie in our lives? Anywhere around us? You can answer in the chat box. Is there a Sophie in your life anywhere?
I think yes, ma'am.
How? Tell me.
Because sometimes we also feel depressed, lonely, and
okay, you're looking at the Sophie inside you. I'm talking. Okay, that is also acceptable. We all have, that Sophie inside us. Maybe we also do something wrong. Maybe we have to pay for it. Maybe not go to jail, but we have to pay for doing a wrong.
Exactly.
Maybe in childhood we had copied and we were caught copying, and maybe we were punished for it in front of the class, in front of the school, and that has remained with us. Not that we did not know that copying is wrong, but we did it in a moment of weakness, and that made us repent. So there is a Sophie inside us. That's a good answer. But do we meet some Sophies around us in society? The boy who serves you in your college canteen, a young boy, or maybe a waiter in a restaurant. We do look at them with empathy, you and I, when they serve us tea in the staff room or something. We do feel bad, but we are not in a position, or we are not ready to maybe help them in some way. Some of us even do. Now, today, most of these young Sopis around us have a cell phone or something. But maybe 10 years back, 15 years back, migration of young boys from villages to cities has happened everywhere in the world. Okay. And when there were no mobiles and all, they could not even communicate with their families at home. Okay. And sometimes, if they have done something really wrong, like Sophie has, maybe he just doesn't want to communicate with his mother. He doesn't want to tell her that I have fallen so low. And his mother might be imagining that her son is no more. But Sophie thinks it is better that his mother thinks maybe he is no more, rather than she knowing that he has been caught for doing something illegal, that he has been in jail. So there are Sophies all around us. See, these are misguided youth. And, it takes a village to bring up a child, because they are influenced sometimes wrong. When they come to a big city like Mumbai, New Delhi, they may be very good from where they come. They may have good values, but they do get spoiled. They do get led astray. Depends on how strong they are, or how strong their upbringing or their sanskars are, that they are able to pull themselves back, or that they don't venture into doing something wrong at all. So, even Barack Obama has said that, one wrong turning in your youth, and you can land up in the wrong place for your entire life. It can happen to anybody. Now, Sophie is a great character, and I have this theory. I don't know where exactly I read it, but it has remained with me. There are good people who only do good, perhaps the saints, which are there in every society. The second category of people are the bad, who only are really who are doing bad things, and they are only bad. So they are black. They are of course few. Saints are also few, and the black people are also very few. Now, the third category is the bad people who do a little bit of good, and that they know how to market that little good they do, and they survive beautifully. We are surrounded by such people also, though they are in a minority. Maybe sometimes people in politics are like that. They do some good, and they cash in on that some good for a long time. We need not go into that. Now let us look at the large majority, where all of us fall. People who are mostly good, but who do some little mistake, sometimes have to pay a very heavy price for it, because we are basically good. If the society were not basically good, it would not have functioned. Society would not have functioned. So basically we are good, but we may sometimes do something wrong, and end up like Sophie. Okay. So we are genuinely charmed by Sophie. We are charmed the way we were charmed by Munna Bhai in the character of Munna, in the Munna Bhai series. He is a scapegrace character, but somewhere we like him, and we want him to succeed in life. And we start feeling so good. Oh, good. He's going to leave the crime. He's going to leave the life of crime, and he's going to become an honest human being. Okay. And just at that moment, fate intervenes. And O. Henry's stories have that element of chance everywhere. Fate takes a hand, and when he has actually not done anything wrong, the police catches him for perhaps trespassing. He thinks he's perhaps going to rob from the church, and he looks also so shady. His clothes are tattered, his shoes, except for that coat. Okay, let's go to the next slide. The next slide, please. Yeah. I think you missed out on, values. Okay. What are the values that young people pick up from this story? Are there any values? Can you tell me in the chat box, or somebody may want to unmute herself or himself, and say what are the values we pick up from this story? Are there any values in the story? Are there any good thoughts that our students can pick up from this story? Are there any answers in the chat box? Okay, let me ask you another question. Should stories always have a moral or a very prescribed moral? Does this story have a moral?
Madam, one answer is there, that is be independent.
Okay,
And
for the first question, what
yeah,
values our young students pick up? Okay, be
yeah,
independent.
yeah.
Okay, okay. That
That
is
is
what they pick up from the story?
one more. For the second question is not always. We don't have morals to every story.
But in spite of that, do we learn something from the story? Any story? Do we learn something from any story?
Yes, is the answer in the chat box.
Yeah. How? Can that person say? Somebody says, of course. Yes. In fact, if we read books, I think that is one of the most important fallouts of reading lots and lots of books. Whatever you read, it's better than not reading. So whatever you read, somewhere it develops our thought process. It makes us think. It shows us what is right and what is wrong. Whatever kind of books we read, they show us what is right from what is wrong. And we learn inadvertently. We learn without meaning to learn. And actually, that is the best way to learn. Okay, and I have already dealt with types of people, the good who do good, the bad who do bad, the bad who do some good, and the good who do something bad. Let's move to the next. However wrong we have gone, there is always a way to come back to the good world. Yes, that's a positive thought. And we'll move to the next slide. Now, here are the, you know what, if we are Indians, we cannot eliminate uh, the idea of rasa. We all know the 9 rasas and they are there on the slide. Which rasa do you think this story evokes? Can you look at the 9 rasas and decide which rasa uh, this story has evoked? Can somebody answer, please? Which rasa is contained in this story out of the 9? Hasya, Shringar, Adbhut, Karun.
Sadness, Karuna, love.
Yes, Karuna. Absolutely. It is the Karun ras. It is about pity. It is about sadness. Yes, Bagde ma'am says sadness. Yes, it is about pity. It is about sadness. We do feel bad for the character, and we feel as bereft as the character when he is caught. Just when he decides that I want to transform, just when he has undergone that cathartic experience, he decides that he is caught. Okay, so yes, the story brings out the Karun ras, and we learn a lot from the story. One of the impacts that we can judge of the story is through the fact that after reading the story even once, it lingers with us for our lifetime. That is the sign of a good story. If it stays with you continuously, if it becomes a part of your life and you draw strength from that story. Now see, the wonderful stories from the Mahabharata, the Puran, the Panchatantra, the Ramayana, so many modern stories that we read, modern short stories in so many languages, Indian and Western, they remain, the stories which remain with us teach us something. And obviously they are written well with the craft that is at the command of the author, and that is why they linger. Yes, the irony of fate. I think we also experience it in our lives. The irony of fate. We are experiencing it just now also. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, activities to enhance the understanding of the craft of writing the story. Now we can do some very creative things with the story, and the first one, adapt the story into a play or a film script. I must recall and mention here that I had been to Bafna College last year, and I think Sarah Verghese from that college is present today. uh, if I'm not mistaken, it was she who had adapted the script of Mrs. Addis into a drama script. And the students had performed the drama on the stage. And you know that part where they bring the son's body into the house, and Mrs. Addis, the mother, is so moved, so shocked that she cannot react. You can't, I mean, I have actually seen this in the Bafna College, and I can tell you that the impact of converting that story into a drama was huge. And the students themselves learned a lot by converting that story into a play. And the impact of performing it was even more. Even we in the audience felt moved when we saw the beautiful story performed. So that is one assignment we can do even in class. We can tell the students that write the script at home and get it next time. And today students are using mobiles. We can ask them to make a film script out of it also. Another activity which we have done in the rapid reading section for years, give a different ending to the story. Now that also brings out the creativity, the expression power of the students. Then this is also another activity which tells them, the third one, which tells them how the craft of the author makes you think and feel the way you do. So locate words and phrases from the text telling you what kind of childhood Soapy had. Now, those cryptic phrases at the end of the story which I read out, the students are going to point out to that, and they are going to learn a little bit about the craft of writing a story. Now, you can also ask them, now that we are teaching them mind maps, we can ask them to draw a mind map about Soapy and the choices he makes, or the day in the life of Soapy. Please move to the next slide. Yeah, I have attempted a mind map of a day in the life of Soapy and the choices that he makes. Now, let us just understand that a note in note making or a mind map is never right or wrong, though for exam purposes we have to mark the students, but actually these are study techniques. So when we use them when we are studying, we can make notes when we are studying, or we can make mind maps when we are studying or listening to somebody talking. And whatever we doodle, we illustrate, we write in the form of either note making or a mind map can never be wrong. Because, the maker of that note or the mind map has some logic in her mind when she makes it. Okay, so my mind map here is a very simple, very crude mind map, but it is mine. And there is nothing right or wrong about it. So for exam purposes, we may mark, but just let's remember that actually this is a teaching technique and it is a learning technique. Okay, now if we look at what I have done, I have drawn a clock because the whole story is contained in a day. At 9 o'clock in the morning, Sophie makes his first choice to go to jail. Now I have used the old spelling of jail, G-A-O-L. Now that is his goal. So I've played on the word jail and goal. By 11 o'clock, he has made his first attempt. By 12, maybe his second, then his third, his fourth attempt maybe at 3 o'clock. Then he's walking towards the suburbs, and he's really dejected. By 6 o'clock maybe, he makes his fifth attempt. And then he moves to the last part of the story, which is maybe 6 or 7 o'clock. That is the epiphanic moment, when at the same moment when he feels that he has to transform his life, at that particular point he gets arrested. So I have attempted the mind map. You can give these kind of creative and interesting activities which the students would definitely like to participate in. Let's go to the the next slide. Yeah, teaching from the exam point of view or teaching for life. Are these two mutually exclusive or opposite of each other? Now, my feeling is, and this is something that I have followed all through my teaching career, is that if you impart pleasure, or if the students find pleasure in whatever they are learning, they learn the best. I mean, if I look at my own past, even my childhood, fifth standard, sixth standard, third standard, fourth standard also, what I learned, I remember. Because I have taken pleasure. I had made in the fourth standard a project for geography. And it was a mm, igloo country. Okay, so we had made cardboard igloos and stuck cotton on the top, which represented ice. This was fourth standard. Till today, I have not forgotten the lesson. Then, the poems that my wonderful teachers taught me. I can remember so many. I still have my school books. And I can remember so many poems that I had studied at that time. Perhaps the teachers had taught passionately. We caught that passion. They had taught with love. They had taught with devotion. They loved the subject. And we picked it up without even realizing we are doing it. And we learned. So, concepts which we learn with pleasure, we learn the best. When we learn through a story, we learn the best. Even maths and science teachers use stories too. And those who illustrate, very boring sums through a story, very boring physics and, chemistry, whatever they do, that also becomes more interesting. It becomes pleasurable. And if the teacher is passionate about what she's teaching, the students catch it. That is why I remembered a very beautiful abhanga of Santa Eknath Maharaj. Bhakti chiye udari janmale jnana. Bhakti ne jnanasi didhale mahimana. Bhakti te moola jnana te phala. If you love what you're doing, if you enjoy what you're doing, if you get pleasure from what you're doing, if you're devoted to what you're doing, you are automatically going to become enlightened. You are automatically going to get jnana. They say the best way to learn is through a story. I began with a story, and I will also end with the same point, that let us learn through various stories. Thank you very much. I'll end here. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. I request all the teachers who are there on the in the Zoom and also who are on the Facebook, please raise your queries. Don't start giving.
Nadim sir, I just saw you. Hello. Nadim Khan sir, I just saw you. Yeah. Yeah, if anybody wants to ask anything, whatever I know, I shall try to answer from that. If I don't know, someone else is also free to answer, please. We are all colleagues.
It was a pleasure listening to your Asashwari ma'am.
Who is, I don't know.
This
who
is Nadeem.
Oh, Nadeem sir. Hello, sir. Hello.
Right.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nadeem sir. I value your compliment.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have a question?
Not yet.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to ask? There was somebody who wrote that I do not see Soapy as a victim. I don't mind answering that question, or somebody else can also answer that question. I remember seeing in the chat box, somebody wrote that Soapy is not a victim.
Ma'am, you can no answer that question.
Okay, I'll answer that question. Okay, see, first of all, I think I have answered it, but I will still just say it in short here. See, Soapy, we have gone into Soapy's mind and heart. The fact that Soapy wants to change, because when he hears the anthem, I think it says a lot for the kind of person he is. If he was a hardened criminal, he would never have felt bad. He would not have wanted to come back from where he had gone. But he wants to make that long route back into normal life, into mainstream life. He is ready to sacrifice a lot to come back. He could have just lazily gone on living the life of a tramp, getting food from somewhere. You get used to that kind of, perhaps we can call it bad habits. But he chooses to return. And we do get a glimpse into his past when he remembers his mother with so much love. Obviously, it says something about him. So he is a victim. Most people who land into crime are victims. No, see, it seems the human beings do have the gene for criminality, but that is very rare. Otherwise, those of us who do become criminals, not that, if they are victims, they should not be punished if the crime is big. But what I'm trying to say is, many people who do unlawful things or petty crimes are victims of circumstances. And Soapy is one such. Yeah.
Thank you, madam. Sir, Ganesh sir, please enable the chat box if it is disabled for all by mistake. Sangeeta madam has rather requested you to suggest some specific speeches for the students.
Specific
Speeches.
speeches. Oh, I think we can begin with our own Swami Vivekanand.
Yeah.
Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar's speeches are extremely powerful. Barack Obama is one great speech maker. Mahatma Gandhi's speeches. Maybe even if we go abroad, I think Martin Luther King's speeches are very, very
Yes,
powerful.
ma'am.
Yeah.
The next question is, won't students from poor background get an idea that living in prison would be easier life?
Even if you live in the present, you're somehow connected to the past and the future. No? You're a product of the past. And
Prison, jail.
oh, prison. Just say the question again, please. I'm sorry.
Won't students from poor background get an idea that living in prison would be easier life?
Yeah. See, in Soapy's place, many of them might make that choice, but Soapy doesn't. They might think, okay, that is an easier life where I don't have to do anything for a living. I might just live in jail, and it's a nice island where they are kept, Blackwell. So he would prefer, and especially in wintry countries. In Bombay, we hardly have a winter, but abroad they have.
Yes, madam.
Yeah.
Actually, there are 200 to 300 people live on Facebook, but the responses, it gets time to come from them.
Yes.
Yeah, it takes some time. And here we have that you mentioned. No, it's not a question. Sagrika madam is saying something among that you mentioned. I request Sagrika madam to unmute herself and put across her question. I'm not able to understand the abhang that you mentioned.
Abhang, I think she means abhang.
Abhang. Yeah. The abhang that you mentioned at the end.
Yes.
A few days back, I was listening to Steve Jobs' video speeches. He resonates the same, the very specific same line. He says,
I'm not surprised.
You have to, ma'am, you must. He says this, that you need to find you need to find out what you love doing, and once you find that, there is no stopping.
Yeah.
So
Steve Jobs, in fact,
essential to find out what you. Yeah.
Steve Jobs, in fact, in his youth had come to India, and he was fascinated by the spirituality in India. And he said when he went back that Indians are extremely intuitive, unlike the West, which are rational.
Very rational. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, the chat box is enabled for everyone. Why has the writer used beautiful adjectives for prison? Isn't it glorifying prison, madam?
I think he is looking at it through Soapy's eyes. For Soapy, it looks like a paradise. It is Sophie's goal. It is his Ithaca. It is his paradise. That's why it looks like that, perhaps. I don't think the author meant to glorify it. We have to look at it from Soapy's eyes. For that moment, for Soapy, it is most important.
Yeah. Prafulla Mahure sir is very much impressed by your mind mapping, and he says, can we use it in the teaching?
Of course, very much so. Yeah.
Okay, with that positive note, I would like to hand over it to Premjit madam.
Yeah.
Good evening, all. On behalf of Team Ellie, I, Mrs. Premjit Gattiganti, take this opportunity to propose a vote of thanks to those who have directly and indirectly contributed to this webinar. At the outset, I want to thank our today's guest speaker, Srimati Raseswari Chonkar Madam. We are really enlightened, madam, with your knowledge and how to deal with the prose through the cope and the anthem. You have touched all the aspects as how to make an interactive classroom while teaching a prose. We are thankful to our honorable mentors, Mr. Avinash Rade sir and Mr. Anil Bagde sir, for their motivation and enthusiastic support. A special thanks to our organizing committee for their unflinching support and coordination. Our heartfelt thanks to all the keynote speakers for attending this webinar and gracing the occasion. Dr. Labbi Kaur Madam, Dr. Shubha Roy Ma'am, Suhasni Madam, Praveen Mule Sir, Jai Shri Madam, Dr. Damodari Sir, Pagare Sir, Manjula Madam, and Nadeem Sir. I would like to thank all the teachers and students for contributing their time on Zoom, Pro, Facebook, and YouTube. With the permission of our President, Mr. Sunil Patil Sir, I declare today's session closed. Sir will make some announcement regarding tomorrow's session. Until then, goodbye from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Premjit ma'am. Yes, I have an announcement for you. I'm a bit excited to announce and rather invite you tomorrow at the same time to attend another exciting webinar rather, by a renowned educationist whom I call rather Bhishmacharya of education, none other than Dr. UD Pradhan. So I invite
I didn't hear you, sir. I just want you to repeat. I didn't hear you, sir. I'm sorry. Because the phone was ringing by mistake.
Yeah, ma'am. So tomorrow, I'm inviting all once again for another exciting webinar by Dr. Umesh UD Pradhan sir on Indian Weavers, second poem of our textbook. Thank you once again, all. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Dear teachers, hello madam. This is one more announcement that you can ask your students to be there on Facebook page, Ellie's Facebook page, and they can visit and they can watch it. Please don't share this login ID and password to the students of Zoom Pro because there might be some difficulties for other teachers to come. Thank you.